This is AIM Agenda. Thanks very much for your company. With me now, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, and the Shadow Minister for Financial Services, Bernie Ripoll. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Steve, on Holden, Jay Weatherall, you heard what he had to say. The government just has to stump up the $500 million that you pulled out, and Holden will be safe.
Well, what I find extraordinary is that it makes it sound as if it's a decision between all or nothing. The reality is that what we've seen with this government is a continuation of $1 billion worth of funding and $1 billion from 2016 and onwards. But most importantly, you know, I thought it was only about 6 months ago that we saw Jay Weatherall, Julia Gillard and Mike Devereaux standing on the shores of the lake here in Canberra saying that Holden had been saved for another 10 years. They went out there, they made that announcement, and then look, lo and behold, here we are 6 months down the track and it's all being questioned again. The simple reality is this, that we have done what we can from a government perspective to look out for Holden's future. The previous Labor government were going to wax them with a $1.8 billion fringe benefits tax. The previous government had a whole range of policy uncertainty when they were introducing a new green car fund and then withdrawing it again. The reality is that Labor, when they were in government, made a complete mess of car funding and the future of the industry. So I'm not surprised that there are all these spillover effects as a consequence of that.
There might have been some inconsistencies and some bad decisions as conceded by Premier Weatherall, but still you were $500 million short of their figure. The Premier's saying now, put that back in and then Holden will be safe.
Well, you know what, we've got a responsibility to start paying down the mountain of debt that's been left by the Labor Party. There's $1 billion that's on the table. We have a huge amount of debt that we've got to deal with. And Kieran, I'm also mindful of the fact that, for example, in my state of Queensland, where there's been literally thousands of job losses in the tourism industry, for example, no one's running up to save those industries with cheques. And, you know, it is very unfortunate that we get into a situation where we seem to say, well, one job's worth more than another. The reality is the best thing we can do is abolish the carbon tax, which puts us in a stronger footing to compete internationally. It reduces overheads for companies. It makes sure that those workers are in a stronger position. And then the other thing we've got to do is provide policy stability and certainty.
You're a Queenslander as well. It's a big industry up there, the tourism industry, and they're struggling in the face of the high dollar. And as Steve Ciobo said, no such subsidies heading their way.
Well, I think what Steve Ciobo is trying to do is just divert from the issue at hand right now. We've got an industry which is exceptionally important to Australia. Manufacturing in this country is not a niche market. This is a really important base to our economy. It underpins 50,000 jobs and much wider if you look at how it flows through the economy. Hundreds of businesses that are reliant on a manufacturing and auto industry. And what we have done in the past is work with the companies, work with Holden, work with Ford and others. And what this government should do is stop playing games with this. Don't play politics. This is too many jobs that are at stake. What they ought to do is directly sit down right now, today. The Prime Minister should sit down with Holden and negotiate a way through this. This is not about saying, you know, our policy is better than your policy. There needs to be a policy which says we don't want to lose this industry. And all you have to do is look at every other economy in the world where there's auto manufacturing, and you'll find that there is some sort of support, some sort of subsidy. There is some sort of government assistance, whether it's in Detroit, whether it's in Germany, whether it's anywhere else in the world. We are at the lower end of that. And this government can't just walk away and thumb its nose at a whole industry, see a whole heap of job losses. The $500 million will vanish into nothing compared to what it'll do to our, you know, tax loss in revenue, what it'll mean to unemployment benefits paid out by the government.
That point that Bernie Ripoll makes there is something that advocates of the industry, the automotive industry, have made for a long, long time, and that is that of the 13 countries around the world that make cars, every single one has some sort of taxpayer subsidy or support.
Sure. And once again, Kieran, I stress the point that there's $1 billion on the table till 2016, another $1 billion post 2016. So let's not fall into this trap of thinking that we're walking away from anything. There's $1 billion sitting there in assistance now and a further $1 billion to flow. Holden's saying that's not enough, we want more. Now, I get that Labor's willing to write out a cheque, it doesn't matter how big it is. I mean, Labor has always indicated that they could not care less how much debt they get this country into, and they will keep signing cheques and writing cheques and saying, well, this this is all because it's in the national interest. But the reality is that I've got to, in good faith, also look workers in my electorate in the eye, workers all around this country who work hard, and say, why is my job worth less support than Labor's prepared to give to those workforces in, for example, some of these car manufacturers? That is the fundamental question.
And beyond that question, there's also, as Steve pointed out, the blank cheque question. Where do you draw the line with an industry that many believe won't be able to survive?
Well, there are no blank cheques because we know exactly the size, and what this government has done is torn up a cheque for $500 million. And I'm with Steve Ciobo on this. I think everyone's jobs are important, but you don't help somebody's job in one part of the economy by destroying somebody else's. The reality is that there will be a flow-on impact, a flow-on effect, and it'll be devastating for this country right across the board. Now, don't forget, this is a government that made an absolute commitment coming into office to create 1 million jobs. Now, while they were in opposition, they said that governments don't create jobs, but now they do. That's what they're saying. But if they're going to create 1 million jobs, they can't do it by destroying the auto industry. They can't do it by destroying manufacturing. They can't do it by getting rid of 50,000 jobs. I want to start seeing the meter on job creation going up, not down. So far, everything this government has done has actually cut jobs. Jobs are going down. And on debt, this is a government that said, you know, no surprises here. We want debt to go down, but the first thing they do is they want a bigger credit card, a bigger blank cheque. They wanted $500 billion. I mean, the two don't go together. Okay. If you want to bring debt down,
let's look
don't
at
make the cheque bigger.
Let's look at the other industry icon, in the air industry, Qantas. What's the government going to do here? I mean, the Qantas Sale Act, Labor says it's not going to look at that and allow greater foreign investment. That would be your preference, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Like that?
I mean, the reality is, and Qantas makes a valid point, the reality is that there are a whole range of fewer restrictions on Virgin Airlines than there are on Qantas. Now, once again, we see the Labor Party playing silly games with this. To me, it is very straightforward. I think the Australian people get this as well, right? If you want the airlines to compete, give them a level playing field. Right? Only the Labor Party is saying, no, under no circumstances will we see a relaxation of the rules under the Qantas Sale Act. So it's the Labor Party that wants to maintain this imbalance between where Qantas finds itself and where Virgin Airlines finds itself.
Okay, well, in that event, will you have to look at a loan guarantee or something like that?
You know, unfortunately, we've got to try to work with the terrain that we've been given. And the terrain in this situation is a hostile Senate because the Greens and the Australian Labor Party will not give Virgin and Qantas a level playing field. Labor says that they don't care. They're going to make sure that those restrictions stay in place in the Qantas Sale Act. So, frankly, I say to all Qantas workers, if they're facing a bleak future, I'm sorry to say that it's because the Labor Party will not move on this. We want a level playing field. Let's make sure that they compete equally, but Labor is the ones that are denying them that opportunity.
Why is that? Because wasn't it the former Labor government, I think it was the Hawke government, that sold it in the first place?
Kieran,
isn't it not a place for governments to be? Kieran, private airline.
Kieran, this is the government that's divided on foreign ownership questions. So let's not go down this path of only the Labor Party. Well, they won government. Let them deal with the issues at hand today. They're divided on Qantas. They're divided on Graincorp. They're divided on every opportunity that we have to grow our economy. And now they just want to shift the blame. Well, they've got their opportunities. They've got their opportunities in the lower house, and they've got their opportunities in the upper house.
And your view on it? Because I was asking your view on the Qantas Sale Act. Why not?
Qantas is our national carrier, and we believe it should remain in major Australian ownership because it's an important carrier and it's an important part of our economy, and we ought to be there making sure that Qantas can survive.
But what if it can't survive in that framework?
Well, again, the government should be talking to Qantas. They should be actually at the table. The problem is they don't talk to anybody. They think they have the answers to everything, and if they don't, they just say, let's just blame Labor. The reality is they're the government now. Let them sit down with Qantas. Qantas have got some major partners. Emirates, for example, they have got opportunities. There are a whole range of structural issues in Qantas that we acknowledge. There's a whole range of issues there. But let's not just jump the gun over all of that and just quickly get to, well, it's the other guy's fault. How about the government do its job? How about the government actually sit down, as it should with Holden, as it should with Qantas, as it should have done differently with Graincorp.
Does the government need to
the government's
consult
divided
more
on this.
on Qantas as well?
You know, Kieran, seriously, I've eaten chocolate mousse with more substance to it than what I just heard from the Australian Labor Party. I mean, Labor's out there saying, oh, they need to talk more and we take no responsibility. I mean, for goodness sake, people get the way this works, right? We've got control of the lower house in terms of having majority. We will make decisions and we get things through there. They're stopped in the upper house by the Greens and the Australian Labor Party. So let's not hear any of this rubbish from Labor about, oh, it's all care, no responsibility, we can't do anything. I say to the Labor Party, ship up. It's time that Labor started making decisions in the national interest, whether it's carbon tax and the fact that Labor is going to oppose that even though the Australian people want it, whether it's Qantas, whether it's Holden, whether it's the $1.8 billion in taxes through FBT that Labor imposed on the car industry or ripped the Green Car Fund out of.
Okay, well, on the carbon tax, the repeal bill goes to the Senate this week. Grant King from Origin Energy has said that you've got to now respect the mandate, get rid of the carbon tax, that it didn't work, turn your attention to direct action, which he believes can work.
Well, Grant King would, of course, say that. He'll be paid a bonus for polluting more. Direct action is about paying him more money and his company and companies like his more money. The reality is...
He argues that emissions will come down with voluntary...
Well, how? Voluntary. Well, of course, that, Kieran, that will always work. It's rubbish. The reality is, unless you set a cap, unless you put some constraints around this, unless you do it... So if on one hand Grant King is saying, yes, we need to do it, but he's got a better method, well, then again, yeah, stump up. I agree. Yeah, show us what it is. But if it's just saying, let us voluntarily do this and we'll do it of our own goodwill, then you'll find that history tells us that's just not going to happen.
All right, Steve, your response?
Well, I'm still stuck on this slandering of a company when Bernie says they're going to pollute more. What's the pollution?
Well, let's not get into this slandering. Don't badger me, Steve, and let's not get into this slandering rubbish. I'm making a point. Grant King has gone out into the public arena and made some specific comments. I'm saying that is not the... I'm saying that is not the case, and I'm saying he would say that because it's to his benefit to say that.
Well, he's one of few people that have come out publicly
very much
and back direct action. You concede that.
Well, the reality is, I'm not going to speculate as to why he's done it. He's done it for whatever reason
he's done it. He's one of few. That's the point. I'm not
I don't think that's inconsistent with past practice. I mean, we've seen industry under governments of both persuasions exercise caution in terms of their public comments. There's nothing new in that. But the reality is this, that the carbon tax comes down to a very basic fact. With a carbon tax or an ETS as Labor proposes, it's going to push the price of electricity up, it's going to push the price of gas up. Under our proposal, those prices are going to come down, saving households $550 a year. That's what we were elected to do, to scrap the world's biggest carbon tax that Labor introduced. We want to scrap it. We want to save households $550 a year. The only thing that stands between that $550 and getting it through is the Labor Party.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
This Monday, big week ahead. Bernie Ripoll, Steve Ciobo. Stay with us on AM Agenda after the break. Graham Richardson and also Labor MP Nick Champion, whose seat covers the Holden plant there in Adelaide. Stay with us.